The silver ship landed in Geneva on a Tuesday morning when most people were drinking their coffee and checking their phones. Nobody expected aliens that day. The ship was small, about the size of a city bus, and it made no sound when it touched. Down in the courtyard of the Global Education Ministry, BUILDING, Dr. Helen Martinez was in her office on the 3rd floor when the alarm started ringing. She looked out her window and saw the ship sitting there like it belonged. Workers ran around the courtyard, some taking pictures, others calling for security. Helen grabbed her coffee mug and walked downstairs to see what was happening. The ship's door opened with a soft hiss. A creature stepped out that looked like it was made of crystal and light. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, and its body sparkled in the morning sun. When it moved, tiny chimes rang like music. This was Ambassador Zethkar from somewhere called the Andromedian Collective. "I seek the leaders of human education," the creature said. Its voice sounded like wind through glass. "I bring an invitation from the Galactic Academic Council." Helen found herself walking forward before she realized what she was doing. As Earth's top expert on how people remember things, she spent her days studying memory and learning. But she never thought aliens would care about human schools. "I'm Dr. Helen Martinez," she said. "I work with cognitive psychology here." The crystal being turned toward her, and she saw that where its face should be, there were patterns of light. That shifted and changed. "Dr. Martinez, your species has been observed. Your educational methods are ... unusual." Helen felt her heart beating fast. Unusual how? "You use stories to remember facts. You connect emotions to data. You build imaginary places in your minds to store information. Most species in the galaxy do not do this." The alien reached into what might have been a pocket and pulled out a device that looked like a smooth stone. When it touched the stone, words appeared in the air made of blue light. Helen could read them perfectly, even though she was sure they weren't in English a second ago. "The Universal Memory Assessment," Helen read out loud. "A standardized evaluation used across 847 known intelligent species to measure cognitive retention. Capabilities. Your species has been selected to participate," Ambassador Zethkar said. "One human will represent Earth in this examination. The Council believes your memory techniques may prove interesting." Helen looked around at her colleagues, who had gathered in the courtyard. Director Murphy, a short man with gray hair, pushed through the crowd. He was the head of the Education Ministry and looked very nervous. "What exactly does this test involve?" Director Murphy asked. The alien's light patterns shifted to what might have been amusement. "The examination uses 12-dimensional holographic projection technology. Information is stored and displayed in ways that go beyond normal space and time. Each question contains thousands of connected data points from civilizations across the galaxy." Helen felt her mouth go dry. "And humans are supposed to compete with aliens who have been doing this for thousands of years?" "The Council finds human methods fascinating. You create what you call memory palaces. You use mnemonics. You tell stories to remember lists. These techniques are unknown to most galactic species." Director Murphy stepped forward. "If we agree to this, what happens to our representative?" "They will travel to Kepler Station in the Vega system. They will take the examination alongside beings from across the galaxy. If they perform well, it will bring great honor to Earth. If they fail ... double quotes, the alien paused. "It will be noted in the galactic records." Helen knew what that meant. Humanity would be marked as intellectually inferior. They might never get another chance to prove themselves to the galactic community. "I'll do it," Helen said. Everyone turned to look at her. Director Murphy's eyebrows went up. "Helen, you don't understand what you're volunteering for." "I understand perfectly. I've spent my whole career studying how humans remember things. If Our methods are really different from alien techniques. Maybe that's our advantage. Ambassador Zethkar's light patterns brightened. Dr. Martinez shows wisdom. The examination will take place in 2 Earth weeks. A transport ship will arrive to collect her. The alien handed Helen another device, this one warm to the touch. This contains basic information about the other species you will encounter. Study it well. The examination will test your ability to remember and connect information from multiple civilizations. With that, Ambassador Zethkar walked back to the silver ship. The door closed, and the ship rose silently into the sky until it disappeared. Helen stood in the courtyard, holding the alien device, feeling like her life had just changed completely. Director Murphy put his hand on her shoulder. "Are you sure about this, Helen?" She nodded, though she wasn't sure about anything. Someone has to represent humanity. And if our memory techniques really are special, I want to find out why. Over. The next 2 weeks, Helen studied harder than she ever had in her life. The device the alien gave her contained information about hundreds of different species. She learned about beings made of pure energy who could process information at the speed of light. There were creatures with multiple brains who could think about dozens of things at once. Some species had perfect photographic memory and never forgot anything. The more she learned, the more worried she became. How could one human compete with beings who had evolved specifically to have perfect memory? But then she remembered what her grandfather used to tell her when she was little and struggling with schoolwork. "Helen," he used to say, "you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You just have to think differently than everyone else." Her grandfather had taught her to build memory palaces when she was 8 years old. He showed her how to turn her childhood home into a place where she could store any information she needed to remember. The kitchen was for math facts, with each cabinet holding different numbers. Her bedroom was for history, with each toy representing a different time period. The living room was for science, with her grandmother's furniture becoming planets and stars. Helen had used these techniques all through school and college. She had written papers about memory palaces and taught the method to her students. But she never thought these simple tricks could be humanity's secret weapon in a galactic competition. The transport ship arrived exactly 2 weeks after the aliens' first visit. This ship was much larger, the size of a football field, and it hummed with barely contained energy. Helen packed her few belongings and said goodbye to her colleagues. As the ship carried her away from Earth, Helen looked down at her home planet, growing smaller and smaller. She thought about all the humans throughout history who had used stories and imagination to remember important things. Ancient Greek poets who memorized entire epic poems. Medieval scholars who built elaborate mental cathedrals to house their knowledge. Her own grandmother, who never wrote down a recipe but could cook any dish perfectly from memory. Maybe the aliens were right. Maybe human memory techniques really were special. Helen hoped so, because in a few days, she would find out if one human's way of remembering things could match the best minds in the galaxy. The ship jumped to faster than light speed, and Earth disappeared behind them. Helen was on her way to Kepler Station, carrying with her not just her own hopes, but the hopes of everyone on Earth who had ever told a story to remember something important. Kepler Station was bigger than anything Helen had ever seen. The massive structure floated in space like a metal city, with towers and rings spinning slowly around a central hub. Lights blinked along its surface, and ships of all shapes and sizes moved in and out of docking bays like busy insects. Helen's transport ship approached one of the smaller docking ports. Through the window, she could see other ships arriving. Some looked like the crystal ship that had visited Earth. Others were so strange, she couldn't figure out which end was the front. One ship seemed to be made entirely of what looked like flowing water held together by invisible forces. The docking process took an hour. Helen felt the ship shake slightly as it connected to the station. A voice spoke in the ship's speakers, first in a language that sounded like musical tones, then in English. "Welcome to Kepler Station. All examination participants report to Level 7, Section Blue. Testing begins in 4 hours." Helen gathered her small bag and walked toward the exit. The door opened, and she stepped into the strangest place she had ever been. The corridor was wide enough for a truck to drive through, and the ceiling was so high she could barely see it. But the most amazing thing was the other beings walking around. A creature that looked like a walking crystal sculpture passed by her, its body ringing like bells with each step. Behind it came something that might have been a giant jellyfish floating in the air, its transparent body pulsing with colored lights. 3 small beings that looked like they were made of silver liquid moved together as one group. Their bodies, constantly changing shaped out. Helen followed the signs to Level 7. Section Blue. The signs showed pictures along with words in different languages, which helped since some of the words kept changing as she looked at them. She passed through several different areas of the station, each one designed for different types of beings. Some areas had thick green air that looked like fog. Others had different gravity that made her feel lighter or heavier. Finally, she reached the examination area. The waiting room was enormous, with different sections for different species. Helen found the area marked for carbon-based bipeds and sat down in what she hoped was a chair. Around her, other beings were preparing for the test in their own ways. Crystal creature she had seen in the corridor was standing perfectly still, its body glowing brighter and dimmer in a steady pattern. Helen realized it was probably accessing its memory systems, checking all the information it had stored. Near the jellyfish being, the air shimmered as data streams flowed between it and several smaller floating creatures that might have been its children or helpers. A group of beings that looked like large insects with metallic shells were connected to each other by thin cables. They seemed to be sharing information directly, their combined consciousness working together like a supercomputer. Helen watched them with growing worry. How could one human brain compete with a hive mind that could think with dozens of individual minds at once? An announcement echoed through the room in multiple languages. "Attention examination participants. Testing will begin in 1 hour. Please review your assigned materials and prepare your memory systems for interface." Helen opened her bag and pulled out the device Ambassador Zethkar had given her. She had studied it for 2 weeks, but she still felt unprepared. The information about the other species was overwhelming. Some of them had been spacefaring for millions of years. Their civilizations had technologies that seemed like magic to human eyes. She closed her eyes and tried to calm down. Her grandfather's voice came back to her from when she was a child. "When you feel scared, Helen, go to your special place. Remember the kitchen where your grandmother cooked. Remember how it smelled like cookies and cinnamon. Remember how safe you felt there." Helen began building her memory palace in her mind. She started with her childhood home, just like her grandfather had taught her. The front door opened into the living room where her family had watched television together. The couch was brown and soft, and her father's favorite chair sat next to the window. This would be her base, the place she would return to when she needed to feel secure. From the living room, she could go to the kitchen. This was where she would store information about alien cultures and their histories. The refrigerator would hold facts about their food and customs. The cabinets would contain their languages and communication methods. The stove would be where she kept information about their technologies and sciences. Up the stairs was her old bedroom. This would be her mathematics and physics storage area. Her bed would represent basic equations. The desk would hold more complex formulas. The bookshelf would contain the really advanced stuff that made her head hurt just thinking about it. The bathroom would store biological information about different species. Her parents' bedroom would be for political and social structures. The basement would be for military and conflict data. The attic would be for art, philosophy, and religion. As Helen built her memory palace, she began to feel more confident. This was something she knew how to do. She had been doing it since she was 8 years old. It didn't matter that the aliens had better technology, or multiple brains or hive minds. They probably didn't have memory palaces. Attention, participants. Please proceed to the grand testing chamber. Helen stood up and followed the crowd of beings moving toward a massive set of doors. The doors were at least 30 feet tall and covered with symbols from dozens of different civilizations. As they opened, Helen gasped. The grand testing chamber was a perfect sphere, easily 300 feet across. There was no floor or ceiling in the normal sense. Instead, different sections of the sphere had different orientations of gravity. Beings could walk on any surface as if it were the floor. Some areas were filled with water for aquatic species. Others had different atmospheres or temperatures. Helen found herself in a section designed for beings like humans. The gravity felt normal, and the air was breathable. Around her, other human-like beings took their positions. She was surprised to see that humans weren't the only bipedal species in the galaxy. Though the others looked quite different from Earth, humans. In the center of the sphere, a massive holographic projector began to activate. The device was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. It looked like a crystal tree made of light, with branches that extended in directions that Helen's eyes couldn't quite follow. This was 12-dimensional projection technology, and Helen realized she was seeing dimensions that normal, 3-dimensional beings weren't supposed to be able to perceive. A voice spoke from everywhere and nowhere at once. Participants, prepare for interface with the Universal Memory Assessment System. The examination will test your ability to store, process, and recall information from multiple galactic civilizations. Helen felt a slight tingling sensation as invisible scanners began reading her brain patterns. Around the chamber, other beings were having different types of scanning equipment attached to their bodies or consciousness interfaces. First question will appear in 30 seconds. You will have 2 hours to process and respond to each major query segment. There will be 5 major segments in total. Helen took a deep breath and closed her eyes for a moment. She went to her memory palace and walked through the front door. Everything was ready. The rooms were organized and waiting. Her grandmother's imaginary cookies were still warm in the oven, filling the kitchen with a smell that made her feel safe and confident. Question 1 beginning now. The holographic projector blazed to life, and suddenly the air around Helen was filled with information. But this wasn't information like she had ever seen before. It was 3-dimensional, then 4-dimensional, then dimensions she couldn't count. Data flowed in streams of light and color. Images appeared and disappeared faster than she could focus on them. Sounds, smells, and even tastes somehow came through the projection. Helen felt overwhelmed for a moment. Then she remembered what her grandfather had always told her. Don't try to catch everything at once, Helen. Pick one thing and put it in its place. Then pick another thing and put it in its place, one thing at a time. She began to sort through the flood of information, taking each piece and walking it to the right room in her memory palace. A fact about ancient trade routes went to the kitchen cabinet next to the sink. A mathematical formula about hyperspace navigation went upstairs to her desk. A piece of alien poetry went to the attic where she kept beautiful things, one by one. Helen began to organize the chaos into her familiar, comfortable spaces. Around her, she could hear other beings working at incredible speeds, their advanced memory systems processing information faster than she could even see it. But Helen didn't try to match their speed. She just kept walking through her memory palace, putting each piece of information in exactly the right place, making sure it was connected to other related information through the hallways and doors of her imaginary home. The question was about the vegan trade wars, a conflict that had lasted 3,000 years and involved 17 different species across 12 star systems. Helen had 2 hours to absorb everything about the politics, economics, military strategies, cultural impacts, and long-term consequences of this massive galactic conflict. She smiled as she organized the last piece of information into her memory palace. Helen finished organizing the first question about the vegan trade wars just as the 2-hour timer ended. Around the grand testing chamber, other beings were completing their responses in very different ways. The crystal creature, which Helen learned was called Shard Prime Keldor, had been glowing steadily brighter throughout the entire exam period. Now its light dimmed as it transmitted its answers directly to the testing system. The hive mind insects had worked together like a living computer, their connected consciousness processing information faster than Helen could follow. When they finished, all of them went completely still at exactly the same moment, as if someone had turned off a switch, the floating jellyfish being pulsed with different colors as it communicated its responses through patterns of light. Helen watched in amazement as the creature's entire body became a display screen, showing complex diagrams and data streams. Helen felt very small and very human compared to these incredible beings. But she also felt something else. She felt proud of her memory palace method. While the other beings had processed information like computers, Helen had made the information part of her life. The trade wars weren't just data points in her mind. They were stories happening in rooms she knew and loved. Attention, participants, the testing system announced. Question 2 will begin in 15 minutes. Please prepare your memory systems for the next information download. During the break, Helen walked around her section of the sphere. She noticed that some of the other beings looked tired. The crystal creature's glow was dimmer than before. 2 of the hive mind insects had disconnected from their group and were sitting alone, their metallic shells making clicking sounds that might have been stress signals. A new being approached Helen during the break. It looked almost human, but its skin was pale blue, and it had 4 arms. When it spoke, its voice was musical and pleasant. "You are the Earth human," it said. "I am Counselor Dexla from the Centauri Republic. I have been observing your method during the first question." Helen felt nervous. Was I doing something wrong? On the contrary. Your approach is fascinating. You appear to be storing information in spatial relationships rather than linear data streams. Is this common among your species? Helen thought about how to explain memory palaces to an alien. We use places we know to help us remember things. I put different information in different rooms of an imaginary house. It helps me organize everything and find it later. Counselor Dexla's 4 eyes widened with interest. Remarkable. Most species either store information directly through technological enhancement or use pure cognitive processing. You are creating emotional and spatial connections to data. This is unprecedented in our galactic records. Is that good or bad? Helen asked. We shall see. The second question is significantly more complex than the first. As if responding to the counselors' words, the testing system spoke again. Question 2 beginning now. Participants will have 2 hours to process and respond to information regarding faster-than-light physics, temporal philosophy, and multi-species cultural analysis. The holographic projector exploded with even more complex information than before. This time, Helen saw mathematical equations that seemed to move and change as she looked at them. She saw philosophical concepts represented as geometric shapes that folded through dimensions she couldn't name. She saw cultural artifacts from 17 different civilizations, each one containing layers of meaning that went deeper than anything humans had ever created. Helen felt panic rising in her chest. This was too much. And mathematics alone would have taken her years to understand back on Earth. How could she process all of this in just 2 hours? Then she heard her college roommate's voice in her memory. Lisa had been studying music, and she used to hum this strange little tune while she did her homework. Helen had always wondered what the song was, but Lisa said she had made it up to help her remember chord progress. IONS. Helen smiled. If Lisa could turn music theory into a song, Helen could turn faster-than-light physics into something she could remember. She began humming Lisa's tune, but she changed the words. Each note became a different part of the mathematical equations, floating around her. The melody helped her organize the numbers and symbols into patterns she could follow. When she hummed the high notes, she thought about energy levels. When she hummed the low notes, she thought about mass and gravity. The philosophical concepts were harder, but Helen remembered the bedtime stories her father used to tell her. He would make up adventures about brave heroes who had to solve problems and make difficult choices. Helen turned the philosophical ideas into characters in an epic story. The concept of temporal causality became a wise old wizard. The paradox of faster-than-light communication became a clever princess who could send messages to her past self. The ethics of altering time became a noble knight who had to choose between saving one person or saving many. As Helen built her story, the mathematical song became the background music for her philosophical adventure. The characters in her story used the mathematical principles as tools and weapons in their quest to understand the universe. The cultural artifacts were the easiest part for Helen to handle. She had always loved cooking with her grandmother, and her grandmother had collected recipes from all over the world. Each alien artifact became an ingredient in a massive feast that her memory grandmother was preparing. The crystal poetry of the Andromedians became a delicate spice that added beauty to any dish. The war songs of the Centauri became a strong seasoning that brought out the flavor of courage. The meditation practices of the vegan mystics became a gentle herb that brought peace to any meal. Helen moved through her expanded memory palace, which now included her college dorm room where Lisa's song played, her father's study where the philosophical adventure was taking place, and her grandmother's kitchen where the cultural feast was being prepared. Everything was connected. The song helped her remember the math that the story characters used to solve their problems, and the cultural ingredients added flavor and meaning to both the music and the adventure. Around her in the testing chamber, Helen could see that other beings were struggling with this second question. The crystal creature's light was flickering unsteadily. The hive mind insects had lost 2 more members, who sat disconnected and motionless. Even the jellyfish beings' color patterns were becoming erratic and confused. Helen realized something important. These advanced beings were incredibly good at storing and processing information, but they weren't good at connecting different types of information together. A crystal creature could remember every mathematical detail perfectly, but it couldn't link those details to philosophical concepts or cultural meanings. The hive mind could process multiple data streams simultaneously, but they couldn't make the creative connections that tied everything together into one coherent understanding. Helen's method wasn't just about remembering information. It was about making information meaningful by connecting it to things she cared about. The mathematics became beautiful when it was part of Lisa's song. The philosophy became important when it was part of her father's heroic story. The cultural information became valuable when it was part of her grandmother's loving feast. When the 2 hours ended, Helen felt confident about her responses. She had not just stored the information. She had woven it into the fabric of her memory palace. The faster-than-light equations were now part of a song she would never forget. The philosophical concepts were characters in a story that would stay with her forever. The cultural artifacts were ingredients in recipes that would always make her feel connected to civilizations across the galaxy. Counselor Dexla approached her again during the next break. Your neural patterns are being monitored by the testing system, the alien said quietly. The readings are unlike anything in our database. Your entire brain is active during information processing, not just the memory centers. Is that bad? Helen asked. It may be revolutionary. You are using creativity, emotion, spatial reasoning, and narrative construction all at the same time. Most species separate these functions. You integrate them. Helen looked around at the other test takers. Many of them looked exhausted now. Their advanced memory systems were being overwhelmed by the complexity of connecting different types of information. But Helen felt energized. Each question was like building a new room in her memory palace, and each room made the whole structure stronger and more interesting. She thought about all the humans back on Earth who used stories and songs and personal connections to remember things. Teachers who turned boring facts into exciting adventures. Students who made up silly rhymes to remember important dates. Grandparents who passed down family history through cooking and storytelling. Maybe Counselor Dexla was right. Maybe this human way of remembering things really was special. Helen was about to find out just how special it could be. The third question had been about galactic history and military strategies. Helen had turned the great space battles into action movies playing in her memory palace's home theater, with each alien general becoming a character she could understand and remember. The fourth question covered environmental science and terraforming, which became a garden party in her backyard, where different alien plants and atmospheric conditions were guests with unique personalities. Now, as the fifth and final question began, Helen could see that most of the other test takers were in serious trouble. Shard Prime Keldor's crystal body had developed cracks from the strain of processing so much diverse information. 3 more of the hive mind insects had disconnected and sat motionless. The jellyfish being's colors had faded to a pale, sickly white. Only Helen seemed to be getting stronger as the test continued. Her memory palace had grown from a simple house into an entire neighborhood. Each new question had added streets, parks, shops, and buildings. The information wasn't just stored anymore. It was alive and connected, with pathways between every piece of knowledge. Final question, the testing system announced. This segment will test synthesis and application. Participants must combine information from all previous questions to address a crisis scenario. You have 4 hours. The holographic projector filled the chamber with the most complex display yet. Helen saw images of dying planets, failing star systems, and millions of suffering beings. The crisis was a galaxy-wide plague that attacked all carbon-based life forms. It was spreading faster than anyone could stop it, and traditional medicine from every known civilization had failed to find a cure. Helen read the problem parameters as they appeared in glowing text around her. To solve this crisis, she would need to combine historical precedents from the trade wars, mathematical models from faster-than-light physics, philosophical frameworks about life and death, cultural understanding of hundreds of different species, military logistics from ancient battles, and environmental science about planetary ecosystems. This was where the other species began to fail completely. Helen watched as Shard Prime Keldor tried to access its stored information about each topic separately. The crystal being could recall every fact perfectly, but it couldn't make the connections between trade war logistics and environmental science. It couldn't see how philosophical concepts about time might relate to medical solutions. The remaining hive mind insects tried to work together, but their collective consciousness was designed for parallel processing, not creative synthesis. They could think about multiple problems at the same time, but they couldn't make the imaginative leaps needed to combine different types of solutions into something new. Helen, however, felt like she had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Her memory palace wasn't just a storage system anymore. It had become a living community where different ideas could meet, interact, and create new possibilities. She started in her grandmother's kitchen, where all the cultural information was stored as ingredients and recipes. She realized that the plague affected different species in different ways because they had different biological needs and cultural approaches to medicine. Some species valued individual treatment, while others preferred community healing. Some trusted technology, while others relied on natural remedies. Helen walked from the kitchen to her father's study, where the philosophical adventure stories lived. The wise wizard of temporal causality whispered to her about how the plague might be stopped before it started if they could understand its origins. The clever princes of faster-than-light communication suggested that the cure might need to be delivered across multiple time streams simultaneously. From the study, Helen went to her college dorm room where Lisa's mathematical song was playing. The equations about energy and mass began to harmonize with the philosophical ideas, creating new melodies that suggested ways to modify the plague's molecular structure. Using principles from both physics and philosophy. Helen then visited her home theater, where the military history was stored as action movies. The great generals of the trade wars had faced similar logistical challenges when they needed to coordinate resources across multiple star systems. Their strategies for supply lines and communication networks could be adapted to distribute a cure to billions of beings across the galaxy. Finally, Helen went to her backyard garden, where the environmental science lived as a party of alien plants and atmospheric conditions. The different guests began talking to each other, sharing ideas about how biological systems could be modified to resist the plague, while maintaining the unique characteristics that made each species special. As Helen moved through her memory palace, something magical began to happen. The information didn't just sit in separate rooms anymore. It began flowing between rooms, creating new connections and possibilities. The mathematical song from her dorm room started playing in the kitchen, turning cooking recipes into chemical formulas. The philosophical characters from her father's study joined the garden party, bringing ethical considerations to the environmental solutions. The military strategies from the theater began coordinating with the cultural ingredients from the kitchen. Helen saw the solution forming like a beautiful, complex tapestry woven from threads of knowledge. The cure wouldn't be a single medicine or treatment. It would be a comprehensive approach that combined multiple strategies customized for each species. Needs and values. The medical component would use modified versions of ancient trade war supply chain networks to deliver customized treatments based on each species' biology. The delivery system would employ faster-than-light communication principles to coordinate simultaneous treatment across multiple star systems, preventing the plague from adapting or spreading to untreated areas. The cultural component would respect each species' healing traditions by incorporating their preferred methods into the treatment protocol. Some species would receive the cure through technological injections, others through ritual ceremonies, and still others through environmental modifications to their home planets. The philosophical component would address the ethical questions about modifying biological systems by ensuring that each species could choose their level of treatment while maintaining their essential characteristics. No species would be forced to change their fundamental nature to survive. The environmental component would modify planetary ecosystems to create natural resistance to future plagues, while preserving biodiversity and supporting the unique needs of each world's inhabitants. Helen spent the full 4 hours weaving all these elements together in her memory palace. By the time she finished, her solution wasn't just a cure for the plague. It was a new model for galactic cooperation that could address any crisis requiring coordination between different species with different needs, values, and capabilities. When Helen submitted her response. Something unprecedented happened in the testing chamber. The monitoring systems that had been tracking all the participants' neural activity began displaying unusual readings. Helen's brain patterns were unlike anything in the galactic database. Instead of the linear data processing patterns shown by other species, her neural activity looked like a living network of interconnected nodes, constantly creating new pathways. And relationships. Counselor Velther, the chief testing administrator, materialized in the chamber as a holographic projection. The ancient being's form shifted between different shapes as it spoke, indicating extreme agitation or excitement. Participant Helen Martinez, the counselor said, your solution methodology is unprecedented. The testing system is requesting permission to analyze your approach in detail. Helen felt nervous. Did I do something wrong? On the contrary, you have demonstrated a form of cognitive synthesis that we believed was theoretically impossible. You have not simply recalled information. You have transformed it into new knowledge through creative integration. Around the chamber, the few remaining conscious participants turned to look at Helen. Even Shard Prime Keldor, despite its cracked crystal form, managed to focus its dim light in her direction. Your solution addresses not only the immediate crisis, but also provides a framework for future interspecies cooperation. More importantly, your methodology suggests that this type of creative synthesis can be taught and learned. Helen thought about her grandfather, who had taught her to build memory palaces. She thought about her college roommate, Lisa, who had turned music theory into songs. She thought about her father, who had made philosophy into adventure stories, and her grandmother, who had made cooking into love. It's not just me, Helen said. Humans have been doing this for thousands of years. We use stories and songs and personal connections to remember things because it makes the information meaningful to us. When information is meaningful, it becomes part of who we are. Counselor Velther's form stabilized into something that might have been amazement. You are suggesting that this methodology is common among your species? Helen nodded. Every human culture has memory techniques like this. We just call them different things. Stories, songs, recipes, traditions. We've always known that the best way to remember something is to make it matter to you personally. The implications of Helen's words rippled through the chamber. The testing chamber fell silent after Helen finished explaining her solution. Counselor Velther's holographic form flickered as data streams flowed around it, processing Helen's responses through the galactic testing network. Other council members began materializing as projections throughout the chamber, their various alien forms creating a rainbow of lights and shapes. Helen stood in her section of the sphere, feeling very small, surrounded by these ancient and powerful beings. She could see the other test participants watching her with expressions she couldn't read. Shard Prime Keldor's cracked crystal body pulsed with a weak, steady light. The few remaining hive mind insects had reconnected to their group and were humming in harmony. The jellyfish being had regained some of its color and was floating closer to Helen's area. The evaluation is complete, Counselor Velther announced. However, the council requests a demonstration. Participant Helen Martinez, would you be willing to teach your methodology to a volunteer from another species? Helen felt her heart skip a beat. Teach someone else? I'm not really a teacher. I just learned this from my grandfather when I was little. That is precisely why we believe you can succeed where formal educators have failed. Your approach appears to be intuitive rather than technical. A young crystal being stepped forward from behind Shard Prime Keldor. This one was smaller and brighter than the older crystal, with fewer cracks and a more musical chime when it moved. I am Zerahin, the young being said. I have been struggling with the creative synthesis portions of the examination. My memory. Core can store vast amounts of data, but I cannot make the connections you demonstrated. Will you teach me? Helen looked at Zarahin and saw something familiar in the way the crystal being's light flickered uncertainly. It reminded her of her nephew Danny when he was having trouble with his homework. He could memorize all the facts for his history test, but he couldn't understand why they mattered or how they connected to each other. Okay, Helen said, but I need you to try something different. Instead of storing information in your memory core, I want you to build a place where the information can live. Zarahin's light patterns shifted to what might have been confusion. I do not understand. Information does not live in places. It exists in data streams and storage matrices. Helen smiled. This was going to be harder than teaching Danny, but the principle was the same. Close your eyes. I mean, dim your light so you can focus inward. Can you remember a place where you felt safe and happy? I remember my first crystallization ceremony. I was bonded with my crystal siblings in the sacred resonance chamber. The walls sang with harmonious frequencies, and the light patterns created by our combined essence were beautiful. Perfect. That's going to be your memory palace. Can you imagine yourself back in that chamber right now? Zarahin's light dimmed, and then began pulsing in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Yes, I can feel the harmony again. I can see the light patterns on the walls. Good. Now, instead of just storing the information about the trade wars in your memory core, I want you to let that information become part of your ceremony. Maybe the different alien species are different crystal siblings joining your bonding. Maybe their trade agreements are different harmonies they're singing together. Helen watched as Zarahin's light patterns began to change. Instead of the steady, mechanical pulsing typical of Christek information processing, the young being's light started dancing in complex, emotional rhythms. I can see it, Zarahin whispered. The vegan merchants are singing their prophet songs, but they harmonize with the Centauri workers' labor chants. The trade routes become light patterns connecting different groups of crystal siblings. It is beautiful. The monitoring systems throughout the chamber began registering unprecedented readings from Zarahin's neural patterns. For the first time in recorded history, a Christek was demonstrating creative emotional connections to data rather than pure logical storage. Counselor, Velther's form brightened with excitement. Continue the demonstration, Dr. Martinez. Helen spent the next hour guiding Zarahin through the process of transforming cold data into warm, personal experiences. She helped the young crystal being turned mathematical equations into musical compositions, with each number becoming a note in a symphony that told the story of space and time. She showed Zarahin how to make philosophical concepts into different, colored lights that painted meaning across the walls of the sacred resonance chamber. Breakthrough moment came when Zarahin successfully connected information from different categories for the first time. A young being was working on the plague solution problem, and suddenly its light exploded in a brilliant display of color and pattern. I understand, Zarahin sang, its voice ringing like cathedral bells. The medical solution is not separate from the cultural considerations. They are part of the same harmony. The cure must sing in tune with each species' essential frequency, or it will create discord instead of healing. The change in Zarahin's cognitive patterns registered immediately on every monitoring system in the chamber. The young Christek had just demonstrated genuine creative synthesis, something that had been thought impossible for their species. Helen felt tears forming in her eyes. She was watching something beautiful happen. Zarahin wasn't just learning a new technique. A young being was discovering a new way to experience the universe. Information wasn't just data anymore. It was alive, meaningful, and connected to everything else. Evaluation complete, Counselor Velther announced, its voice carrying across the chamber with unusual warmth. Dr. Helen Martinez has achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. A massive holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber, showing Helen's test scores. Perfect marks in every category. But more than that, she had created new categories that the testing system had never seen before. Creative synthesis, emotional integration, narrative construction, cross-species empathy. Furthermore, the counselor continued, a teaching demonstration has proven that human memory methodology can be successfully adapted by other species. This discovery has implications that extend far beyond academic testing. Around the chamber, Helen could see representatives from dozens of alien species appearing as holograms. The news of her success was already spreading across the galaxy. Species that had been isolated by their different ways of thinking were suddenly interested in learning human memory techniques. The Andromedian Collective sent a formal request for cultural exchange programs. The Vegan Trade Federation proposed joint research initiatives. Even the mysterious void dwellers from beyond the galactic rim sent their first communication in over 1,000 years, expressing interest in human storytelling methods. But the most important development was happening right in front of Helen. Zara Hin was teaching another young crystal being how to build a memory palace. The technique was spreading organically, being adapted and modified for different species' unique characteristics. Helen realized that she had started something that would change the galaxy forever. By teaching beings to create emotional and personal connections with information, she had given them a tool for understanding each other across the vast differences between species. Counselor Valther approached Helen personally, its ancient form solidifying into something almost human-like. Dr. Martinez, the Galactic Academic Council, extends an unprecedented invitation. Would you be willing to establish the first Human Memory Academy here on Kepler Station? Helen thought about her grandfather, who had taught her to build memory palaces in his kitchen while her grandmother baked cookies. She thought about her father's bedtime stories and her roommate's silly songs and all the humans throughout history who had used imagination and emotion to make knowledge meaningful. I would be honored, Helen said. But I want to bring other humans here too. This isn't just my method. It belongs to all of humanity. 6 months later, Helen stood in the main classroom of the Human Memory Academy, watching students from 17 different species learn to build their own memory palaces. A young hive mind drone was creating individual memories for the first time in its species' history. An elderly void dweller was learning to use light patterns to store personal experiences. A group of aquatic beings from the Tau Ceti system had modified the technique to work with sonar and water currents. But Helen's favorite student was still Zara Hin, who had become the first Christek to write poetry. The young being's verses were mathematical equations that told stories about love and loss and hope, creating bridges between logic and emotion that no one had thought possible. Helen received a message from Earth that morning. Her nephew, Danny, had used memory palace techniques to ace his history test. He had turned the American Revolution into an adventure story happening in his video game world, with each historical figure becoming a character he could understand and remember. Helen smiled as she read Danny's excited message. The techniques that had started in her grandfather's kitchen and traveled to the stars were coming home again, helping human children learn and grow. The circle was complete, but it was also just beginning. Across the galaxy, beings were discovering that the best way to remember something was to make it matter to them personally.